Welcome to this journey through one of the most haunting phenomena in Appalachian folklore, a mystery that transforms crystal waters into crimson streams each autumn. Tell us where you're watching from now, because this story will chill you in a way few other accounts can, reaching deep into the shadows where history, tragedy, and the inexplicable converge. We're about to delve into a mystery that has persisted for over a century and 30 years, where the natural world itself seems to remember an atrocity so profound that the very stones and waters cannot forget. This is the story of Bloodroot Creek in eastern Kentucky, a waterway that defies scientific explanation every October 13th, running red as arterial blood from dawn until dusk. It was the year 1892. While the Chicago World's Fair was being planned to showcase American progress and modernity, and while the nation was still healing from the wounds of Reconstruction, the remote hollows of Cumberland Plateau remained virtually untouched by the march of civilization. In places like Harlan County, Kentucky, the situation was dramatically different from the cities here. In these ancient mountains, time moved slower, justice was administered by different codes, and the land itself held memories that refused to fade. The Appalachian Mountains have always been a place apart. Their peaks, shrouded in perpetual mist, their valleys carved deep by millennia of rushing water, have witnessed human drama since the first Cherokee and Shawnee peoples walked these ridges. By the late 19th century, these mountains had become home to Irish settlers whose ancestors had arrived generations earlier, bringing with them customs, superstitions, and a fierce independence that defined mountain culture. But they also brought something darker: old grievances, blood feuds, and a belief in justice that existed outside the reach of any courthouse. Bloodroot Creek winds through a hollow so narrow and deep that sunlight touches the water for only 3 hours each day, even in midsummer. The creek takes its name not from its infamous autumn transformation, but from the bloodroot plant, Sanguinaria canadensis, which grows prolifically along its banks, with roots that bleed red sap. When broken, the name would prove grimly prophetic. The hollow itself is a cathedral of stone and shadow. Limestone cliffs rise 200 feet on either side, their faces streaked with iron oxide and draped with rhododendron thickets so dense they form impenetrable walls. Ancient hemlocks lean over the water, their branches creating a perpetual twilight even on the brightest days. In autumn, when the maples turn scarlet and the oaks burn gold, the hollow becomes a corridor of flame, beautiful and somehow threatening in its intensity. Water flows down from the high ridges, collecting in dozens of seeps and springs before converging into Bloodroot Creek. The water is ordinarily clear as glass, so pure you can count pebbles on the bottom at depths of 6 feet. Native brook trout, their sides spangled with red and gold, hold in the pools behind moss-covered boulders. Salamanders, some as long as a man's forearm, lurk beneath flat stones. The creek was, by all accounts, an ordinary mountain stream, until it wasn't. In 1892, the McAllister family had lived in Bloodroot Hollow for 3 generations. Their patriarch, Josiah McAllister, was 68 years old that autumn, a lean, weathered man with eyes the color of creek water and hands that bore the scars of a lifetime working timber and land. Josiah's father had built the original cabin in 1837, a solid structure of hand-hewn logs chinked with clay and moss, positioned on a rare flat bench of land 50 yards from the creek. By 1892, that original cabin had been expanded into a compound of sorts, the main house with its stone chimney and covered porch, a smokehouse where venison and pork hung in fragrant cedar smoke, a springhouse built over a cold seep, a barn for the 2 mules and handful of cattle, and scattered out buildings for tools and storage. It was a prosperous homestead by hollow standards, the result of generations of hard work and careful stewardship. Josiah lived there with his wife Martha, his 3 sons Thomas, Daniel, and William and their families. In total, 17 McAllisters called Bloodroot Hollow home. They were known throughout the county as decent people, hard workers, fair dealers. Thomas, the eldest son at 42, had inherited his father's skill with timber and had built a small sawmill operation where the creek widened about a mile downstream. Daniel, 38, managed the farm and livestock. William, the youngest at 34, was considered the family scholar. He could read and write with uncommon skill and kept meticulous records of births, deaths, weather, and notable events in a series of leather-bound journals. The journals would prove crucial to understanding what happened, but the hollow held other residents as well. About 3 miles upstream, where Bloodroot Creek forked into 2 smaller tributaries, stood another cabin smaller, rougher, its logs dark with age and neglect. This was the home of the Carver family. The Carvers were a different breed entirely. Ezekiel Carver had arrived in the hollow in 1885, appearing one autumn day with a wagon, a pregnant wife, and a reputation that whispered behind him like smoke. Nobody knew exactly where he'd come from. Some said Virginia, others claimed Tennessee. A few insisted he was running from something in West Virginia. What everyone agreed on was that Ezekiel Carver was trouble. He was a big man, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed too wide for doorways and hands that could span a man's skull. His face was all hard angles, sharp cheekbones, a prominent brow, a jaw like carved granite. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, and they had a quality that made people uncomfortable, as if he was always calculating distances, angles, vulnerabilities. Ezekiel's wife, Sarah, was a small, timid woman who rarely spoke above a whisper. The locals noticed bruises that appeared and disappeared on her arms, her neck, glimpses of purple-yellow contusions that told stories she would never voice. She bore Ezekiel 3 children in quick succession, 2 boys and a girl, and died in childbirth with a 4th in 1890. After Sarah's death, something in Ezekiel shifted, or perhaps whatever had always been wrong with him simply stopped hiding. The children Abraham, Samuel, and Rebekah grew up wild and strange. They appeared in town rarely, and when they did, people noted their hollow eyes, their unwashed clothes, their feral wariness. Teachers attempted to enforce truancy laws, but the Carver children attended school sporadically at best. When they did appear, they sat silent in the back row, watching but not participating, gone before anyone could question them. Stories began to circulate. Missing livestock chickens first, then larger animals. A neighbor's dog found dead, killed in a way that suggested neither predator nor accident. Travelers who took the trail through Upper Bloodroot Hollow reported unsettling encounters, figures watching from the trees, strange noises in the night, a pervasive sense of being followed. But this was mountain country in the 1890s. Law enforcement was scarce, stretched thin across vast territories of rugged terrain. Unless violence occurred in town or involved prominent citizens, the sheriff's office rarely ventured into the remote hollows. People handled their own problems, settled their own disputes, and minded their own business with a determined intensity. The McAllisters tried to be good neighbors despite their misgivings. They left the Carvers alone, maintained polite distance, helped when asked but didn't pry. Josiah McAllister, with his decades of mountain wisdom, counseled his sons to avoid unnecessary conflict. Some people carry darkness in them. He told Thomas one evening on the porch, watching storm clouds gather over the ridges. Best to give that darkness wide berth and pray it doesn't turn your way. But darkness has its own trajectory, and prayer, as the McAllisters would learn, is sometimes insufficient protection. The trouble began in earnest in the spring of 1890, too, though its seeds had been planted long before. On a cold morning in early April, Daniel McAllister discovered that 4 of his best-laying hens had been stolen during the night. The coop door had been forced open, not broken, but opened with knowledge of the simple latch mechanism. No feathers, no blood, no sign of predation. Just 4 hens gone, vanished into the mountain night. A week later, William McAllister's hound dog disappeared. The dog, a reliable tracker named Boone, had been tied outside the cabin as usual. In the morning, only a chewed-through rope remained. William found tracks, human tracks, barefoot and large, leading toward upper Bloodroot Creek, before disappearing into the rocky streambed where water erased all trail. Then in May, Thomas's sawmill was vandalized. Someone had opened the sluice gates during the night, draining the mill pond and leaving the water wheel sitting useless in mud. Worse, several of the saw blades had been damaged, not broken cleanly, but nicked and bent in ways that suggested deliberate sabotage with a hammer or rock. The McAllisters convened a family meeting. 17 people gathered in Josiah's cabin on a humid May evening, with fireflies beginning their nightly dance outside and whippoorwills calling from the darkening ridges. "We know who's doing this," Thomas said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Everyone knows." "Knowing and proving are different matters," Josiah replied. His voice was still strong despite his age, carrying the authority of decades, and accusing without proof is a dangerous path. "So we do nothing," Daniel demanded. "We let them steal from us, destroy our property, maybe worse. We go to the sheriff," William suggested. He was the diplomatic one, always seeking legal remedies. "We file complaints, we document everything. The sheriff won't come up here for chickens and a dog," Thomas said flatly. "You know that. We handle this ourselves or we lose everything we've built." The debate continued for hours. Ultimately, Josiah's caution prevailed. They would document everything, would attempt to speak with Ezekiel Carver man, and only if that failed would they take stronger measures. 2 days later, Josiah and his 3 sons rode up the hollow toward the Carver place. It was late afternoon, the light already fading in the deep valley, shadows pooling like dark water beneath the trees. They found Ezekiel outside his cabin, skinning what looked like a deer, or what had once been a deer anyway. The carcass was so mutilated it was hard to identify. "Ezekiel," Josiah called out, staying mounted, keeping distance between them. "We need to have words with you." Ezekiel didn't look up from his work. His knife moved with practiced precision, separating hide from muscle. Blood ran down his forearms, dripping from his elbows. "Speak, then. We've had problems," Josiah continued, keeping his voice level and respectful. "Thefts, property damage. The trail leads to your section of the hollow." Now Ezekiel looked up, those pale eyes fixed on Josiah with an intensity that was almost physical. "You accusing me of something, old man. I'm saying we need an understanding. We've been patient neighbors, left you in peace. We expect the same courtesy." "Courtesy," Ezekiel repeated, and something like a smile touched his lips, not humor, but something colder. "You McAllisters, with your big family and your mill and your prosperous compound, you think you own this hollow. We own our land, same as you own yours," Thomas interjected. "That's all we're saying. What's ours is ours. What's yours is yours." Ezekiel set down his knife slowly. Behind him, the cabin door opened and his 3 children emerged, Abraham and Samuel, young men now at 17 and 15, and 12-year-old Rebecca. They stood silent, watching, their eyes reflecting what little light remained. "Get off my property," Ezekiel said quietly, "and don't come back. Next time I won't be so charitable." The McAllisters left. What else could they do? They'd attempted diplomacy, had shown respect despite their anger. But as they rode back down the hollow in gathering darkness, each man felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening temperature. "This isn't over," Thomas said. He was right. Throughout the summer of 1892, the incidents escalated. A section of fence cut and cattle scattered. The springhouse contaminated with animal waste. Rocks thrown through cabin windows in the dead of night. And always, the incidents occurred when no one was watching, with no witnesses, no proof, nothing that would bring law enforcement into the hollow. The psychological toll was significant. The McAllister children grew fearful, reluctant to venture far from the compound. The women looked over their shoulders constantly, startled by snapping twigs and bird calls. The men began carrying rifles everywhere, even to the barn or the creek for water. Sleep became difficult. Every night sound, every unexplained creak of settling logs, every hoot of an owl might be something more sinister. William McAllister documented everything in his journal. His entries from that summer make for disturbing reading, tracking the family's growing paranoia and helplessness. June 23rd, another fence cut. Found strange symbols carved into trees near the property line. Circles and crosses that look like some kind of warning. Father says ignore them, but Sarah Williams' wife says they're hex marks. She's scared. July 8th. Heard something outside the cabin last night. Footsteps, definitely human, circling the house. When I went out with the rifle, found nothing but tracks. Barefoot tracks large. Samuel Carver is big for his age, nearly as big as his father. August 2nd. Thomas says we should band together, take the fight to them. Daniel agrees. Father forbids it. Says violence will only breed more violence. But how long can we endure this? How long before someone gets hurt? On August 15th, someone did get hurt. Thomas's oldest son, Michael, just 19 years old, strong and capable, was working alone at the sawmill, performing maintenance on the water wheel. It was late afternoon. The hollow was already in shadow, but the work needed finishing before dark. He never came home. When Thomas went looking for him at dusk, he found the sawmill deserted. Tools scattered, work left half, finished. And on the sawmill floor, a dark stain that could have been water but wasn't. Blood. Not much, but enough. The entire McAllister clan mobilized. They searched through the night with torches and lanterns, calling Michael's name until their voices went hoarse. They followed the creek upstream and down, searched the woods, climbed the ridges, nothing. At dawn they found him. Michael's body was in the creek, wedged against a logjam about half a mile downstream from the sawmill. He'd been in the water long enough that his skin was pale and waterlogged, but not long enough to obscure the wounds. His skull had been crushed by something heavy, a rock or a club. His hands showed defensive wounds, cuts and bruises that indicated he'd fought his attacker. The doctor from town, summoned by desperate rider, confirmed what everyone already knew: murder. Blunt force trauma to the head, death occurring sometime the previous evening. The killer had struck from behind, giving Michael no chance to defend himself effectively, then had dragged or carried the body to the creek, possibly hoping the water would wash away evidence. Sheriff Thomas Breckenridge arrived 2 days later. He was a career lawman, 50, 3 years old, with a reputation for methodical investigation and a dim view of mountain justice. He interviewed the family, examined the body, inspected the sawmill, and then critically rode up the hollow to question Ezekiel Carver. What happened during that interview, nobody knows for certain. The sheriff stayed at the Carver place for 2 hours. When he emerged, his face was grim, but he made no arrest. Insufficient evidence. He told the assembled McAllisters back at their compound. Ezekiel Carver claims he and his sons were home all evening. They're each other's alibi. The girl Rebecca backs their story. Without witnesses or physical evidence tying them to the scene, I can't make an arrest. Everyone knows who did this, Thomas said, his voice raw with grief and fury. Knowing isn't proof. Breckenridge replied, unconsciously echoing Josiah's earlier wisdom. I understand your pain. I've lost children myself. But if I arrest a man without sufficient cause, a judge will release him, and any subsequent case becomes impossible to prosecute. We need more evidence, so we just wait. Daniel demanded. Wait for them to kill another of us. You stay vigilant, you stay armed, and you don't go anywhere alone. The sheriff said, I'll assign a deputy to patrol this area, and I'll personally look into the Carver's background, see if there's anything in their past that might provide leverage. But I need you to promise me. No vigilante action. The moment you take justice into your own hands, you become the criminals. The McAllisters promised. What choice did they have? But promises made in grief are fragile things. September passed in uneasy tension. The deputy never appeared. Stretched resources, they were told. The sheriff's background investigation turned up nothing useful, or nothing he shared. The McAllisters buried Michael on a sunny hillside overlooking the hollow, under a stone marked with his name and dates, 1870, 3 to 1890, 2. 19 years, that's all he'd gotten. The harassment from the upper hollow stopped after Michael's death. No more stolen livestock, no more vandalism. An ominous quiet settled over Bloodroot Hollow, the kind of silence that precedes thunder. Then came October. October in the Appalachian Mountains is a time of almost supernatural beauty. The hardwood forests ignite in shades of crimson, gold, and orange. The air becomes crisp and clear, perfect for breathing deep. Apples ripen in wild orchards planted by settlers long dead. Deer move in herds, preparing for winter, and the mountains seem to glow with an inner light, as if the stone itself remembers ancient fires. But in Bloodroot Hollow that October, the beauty felt menacing. The brilliant leaves seemed like bloodstains. The clear air carried whispers. The perfect weather felt like a last gift before some terrible darkness descended. William McAllister's journal entries from early October are brief and cryptic. October 1st, dreams. Terrible dreams of water running red, and voices screaming in languages I don't understand. Sarah says I cry out in my sleep. The children are frightened. October 5th, Father spoke with the family elders. They consulted the old almanac and the scripture. Something is coming. We can all feel it. The animals feel it too. The horses are restless. The cattle won't venture to the upper pastures. Asterisk, October 10th. 3 days until the full moon. Thomas and Daniel have been making preparations. They won't say what kind. Father prays constantly. I fear we are approaching a reckoning. What Thomas and Daniel were preparing was a raid. They'd spent weeks gathering intelligence, watching the Carver place from concealed positions on the ridges. They'd documented the family's patterns when they slept, when they worked, when they were vulnerable. They'd recruited 3 other men from neighboring hollows, families who'd also suffered from the Carver's predations. They'd stockpiled weapons and ammunition, and they'd picked a date, October 13th. The choice wasn't random. October 13th was the dark of the moon, the 3 nights when the moon is invisible, when darkness is complete. It was also a date with significance in mountain folklore, one of the unlucky days. when the veil between worlds was said to thin. Josiah discovered the plan on October 12th. His sons told him during an evening meeting in the barn, away from the women and children. Thomas laid out their strategy. They would surround the Carver cabin before dawn, force a confrontation, and if Ezekiel and his sons resisted, which they undoubtedly would, they would meet that resistance with lethal force, justice by their own hands, since the law had failed them. "This is murder you're planning," Josiah said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Not justice, murder. They murdered Michael," Thomas replied. "They've terrorized us for months. The law won't touch them. Someone has to. And what makes you different from them if you do this?" Josiah asked, "What makes you better than Ezekiel Carver?" "We're protecting our family," Daniel said. "That's what makes us different." Josiah looked at his sons, these men he'd raised, taught, guided for decades. He saw determination in their faces, and rage, and grief, and fear. He saw men pushed past their breaking point, past the boundaries of civilized behavior. "I can't stop you," Josiah said finally. "You're grown men with families of your own, but I can't condone this either, and I won't participate." "We're not asking you to," Thomas said quietly. "Stay here with the women and children. Keep them safe. We'll handle this." That night, William McAllister made his final journal entry before the events that would define Bloodroot Hollow forever. October 12, 1892. "Tomorrow, my brothers and 3 others will ride to the upper hollow at dawn. They carry rifles, pistols, and resolution hardened by months of fear, and 1 dead nephew. I am going with them, though my hands shake as I write this. Father asked me to stay, but I cannot. Michael was my nephew. This is my family. This is my responsibility. If God judges us harshly for what we're about to do, then so be it. But we cannot let evil go unchallenged. We cannot let murderers sleep peacefully while we bury our dead. Sarah is crying in the bedroom. She knows, they all know. May the Almighty have mercy on us all." October 13th, 1892, dawned cold and clear. Frost coated the grass and turned spiderwebs into elaborate lace. Mist rose from Bloodroot Creek, creating a ghostly presence in the hollow. The sky was pale, colorless, waiting for the sun to crest the eastern ridges. 6 men rode up the hollow in near silence: Thomas, Daniel, and William McAllister, along with Harrison Peters, Jacob Whitley, and Samuel Combs from neighboring valleys. They were armed with rifles, revolvers, knives. They wore grim expressions and kept their eyes forward, each man alone with his thoughts and fears. They reached the Carver place just as the first sunlight touched the highest peaks. The cabin was dark, silent. Smoke rose lazily from the chimney, suggesting someone had been up earlier to stoke the fire, but had returned to bed. The outbuildings, a lean-to barn, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, stood ramshackle and slightly askew, as if the very structures reflected the disorder of their owners. Thomas dismounted and motioned for the others to spread out. They positioned themselves in a semicircle facing the cabin, maintaining distance but ensuring crossfire coverage. It was a military maneuver, something Thomas had learned during a brief stint in the territorial militia years earlier. "Ezekiel Carver," Thomas shouted. His voice echoed off the limestone cliffs, rolling up and down the hollow. "Come out, we need to settle accounts." "Silence, we know what you did," Daniel called. "We know you killed Michael. Come out and face justice." More silence. But now, subtle movement visible through gaps in the cabin's chinked walls, shadows shifting, bodies moving. "You have 1 minute," Thomas shouted. "Come out peacefully and we'll take you to the sheriff. Resist and we'll burn you out." The cabin door slammed open. Ezekiel Carver emerged holding a rifle. Behind him came Abraham and Samuel, also armed. Rebekah appeared in the doorway, clutching a shotgun that seemed too large for her small frame. "You come onto my property making threats," Ezekiel said, his voice carrying despite its conversational volume. "You bring guns and speak of justice. You don't know the meaning of the word. You killed my son," Thomas said, his voice breaking slightly. "You murdered a 19-year old boy. Why, what did we ever do to you? You existed," Ezekiel said simply. "You and your perfect family and your prosperous farm. You think you're better than me. You've always thought that. We want justice," Daniel said. "That's all. Come with us to town, face a judge, let the law decide." Ezekiel laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The law, the same law that ignored me when I reported your cattle grazing on my land. The same law that looked the other way when your brother's sawmill runoff poisoned my creek. You McAllisters have bought and paid for the law. There is no justice for people like me." "We never touched your land," William protested. "We never did anything to you. You're insane." "Maybe I am," Ezekiel agreed. "But if I am, you made me this way. You and everyone like you." What happened next occurred in seconds, but would be debated and analyzed for generations. Ezekiel raised his rifle. Thomas fired. The shot echoed like cannon fire in the narrow hollow, a deafening percussion that sent birds exploding from the trees and started a cascade of other shots. The 6 McAllister allies fired almost simultaneously, a ragged volley that shattered the morning calm. Ezekiel fell backward, his body jerking as multiple rounds struck him. Abraham took a bullet in the chest and spun away, crashing into the cabin wall. Samuel returned fire, his shots wild but forcing the attackers to dive for cover. Rebekah screamed, a high, piercing sound that seemed to go on forever. The gunfight lasted perhaps 30 seconds. It felt like hours. When the smoke cleared and the echoes faded, 4 people lay dead or dying. Ezekiel Carver had taken at least 5 bullets' fatal wounds to the chest and abdomen. Abraham was dead, a massive exit wound between his shoulder blades. Samuel had been hit in the leg and was bleeding heavily, but was still conscious. Rebekah was unharmed, but had dropped her shotgun and stood frozen, her hands covering her mouth, eyes wide with shock. On the attacker's side, Harrison Peters had taken a bullet in the shoulder. Samuel's lucky shot had found flesh despite its wild trajectory. The others were unscathed physically, though every man looked shaken, pale, some beginning to realize the magnitude of what they'd just done. "Jesus," William whispered. He was staring at his hands, at the rifle he still held, as if seeing both for the first time. "Jesus Christ, what have we done?" "Justice," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was looking at Abraham's body, a 17-year-old boy, whatever his crimes, now a corpse leaking blood into the dirt. "We need to get the sheriff," Daniel said, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. "Right now. We need to report this before anyone can say we murdered them." They bound Samuel's leg to stop the bleeding, despite his curses and threats. They convinced Rebekah to come with them, gently, treating her like the traumatized child she was. They loaded Harrison Peters onto his horse, his shoulder wound packed with cloth, and they rode down the hollow toward town, leaving 3 bodies behind in the cold morning light. Behind them, Bloodroot Creek continued its eternal flow, clear and clean, running over stones worn smooth by millennia. For now, the legal proceedings were surprisingly swift. Sheriff Breckenridge arrived at the Carver place by mid-afternoon, accompanied by 2 deputies and the county coroner. They documented the scene, photographed the body's new technology that was just becoming standard in law enforcement, and interviewed both the McAllister group and the surviving Carvers. The coroner's report was unambiguous. Ezekiel Carver had been killed by multiple gunshot wounds, any one of which could have been fatal. Abraham Carver had died from a single shot that had severed his spine and torn through his heart. The positions of the bodies, the angles of the wounds, and the powder burns all supported the McAllister's version of events. Ezekiel had raised his weapon first, prompting defensive fire. Samuel Carver, interviewed while recovering from his leg wound, initially claimed the McAllisters had ambushed them without provocation. But under sustained questioning, he admitted his father had raised his rifle first. Rebecca, traumatized and barely verbal, confirmed this account. "They came to take us to town," Samuel eventually said, his voice flat and effectless. "Father said he'd rather die than face their justice. I think he meant it. I think he wanted to go down fighting." A grand jury convened on October 20th. After 2 days of testimony, they declined to indict Thomas, Daniel, or William McAllister on murder charges. The ruling cited self-defense and the protection of community safety. Harrison Peters, Jacob Whitley, and Samuel Combs were similarly cleared. It was, by the standards of frontier justice, a clean resolution. The Carvers had been a threat. That threat had been eliminated. Life could return to normal, except it didn't. The first sign came on the night of October 23rd, exactly 10 days after the shootings. Daniel McAllister woke in his cabin to a strange sound, rhythmic and liquid, like someone pouring water from a great height. He rose, lit a lantern, and stepped outside. Bloodroot Creek was red, not the amber red of iron sediment or the brown red of heavy mud. This was the deep, arterial red of fresh blood. The entire creek, from bank to bank, from as far up the hollow as Daniel could see to as far down, ran crimson in the lamplight. The water moved sluggishly, thicker than water should be, and it stained the rocks it touched. Daniel stood paralyzed, his mind refusing to process what his eyes reported. Then he ran to wake his brothers. By the time Thomas and William arrived with their own lanterns, a dozen other family members had emerged. They stood in a semicircle on the creek bank, staring at the impossible sight before them. "What is this?" William whispered. "What have we done?" Josiah McAllister, looking older than his 68 years, waded ankle deep into the red stream. He bent, cupped water in his hands, raised it to his face. The liquid was water. It had water's consistency, water's temperature. But the color remained vivid and undeniable. "It's a judgment," Josiah said quietly. "The land itself is bleeding." The phenomenon lasted until dawn. As the sun rose, the red gradually faded, the water returning to its normal clarity over the course of perhaps 15 minutes. By full daylight, Bloodroot Creek looked exactly as it always had, clean, clear, innocent. But the stones remained stained. Word spread quickly. Neighbors ventured into the hollow to see for themselves. Most found nothing unusual. Clear water, ordinary stones. But a few claimed they could still see faint traces of red, ghostly echoes of the night's manifestation. The McAllisters hoped it was a one-time occurrence, some strange geological or chemical reaction triggered by unknown factors. They tried to convince themselves that unusual mineral deposits or disturbed sediments from the gunfight had temporarily discolored the water. Then came October 13th, 1893. Again, the creek ran red from nightfall until dawn. This time, more witnesses saw it, people who'd come specifically to observe, drawn by rumors and morbid curiosity. Dozens of people confirmed the phenomenon. Local scientists from the university in Lexington were summoned. They took water samples, tested for iron content, analyzed for blood proteins, examined the substrate. Their findings were inconclusive and contradictory. Some tests showed elevated iron levels consistent with natural mineral leaching. Other tests showed organic compounds that shouldn't be present. One sample, examined under microscope, appeared to contain what looked like blood cells, though degraded beyond proper identification. Another sample, taken simultaneously from the same location, showed no such anomaly. The results make no sense. Professor Martin Hensley from the university later wrote in his report, "They violate basic principles of chemistry and physics. I can only conclude that either our instruments are faulty or something is occurring in Bloodroot Creek that exceeds current scientific understanding." The pattern established itself. Every October 13th, without fail, Bloodroot Creek runs red. The transformation begins at sunset and lasts until dawn. During those hours, the water is visibly, undeniably crimson, the color of arterial blood. Samples taken during the event show wildly varying results. Photographs capture the phenomenon, though skeptics claim photographic manipulation. And every year, visitors come to see it. At first, locals mostly, mountain people drawn by superstition and curiosity. Later, as word spread, outsiders arrived. Researchers, paranormal investigators, journalists, thrill seekers. The quiet hollow became a destination, at least for that one night each year. The McAllister family dealt with the phenomenon in different ways. Thomas became withdrawn, rarely speaking about the events of October 13th, 1892. He died in 1912, taking whatever guilt or knowledge he possessed to his grave. Daniel moved away in 1900, relocating his family to Ohio, though he returned to be buried in the family plot in 1928. William continued keeping his journal until his death in 1935, though his later entries are cryptic and increasingly concerned with theological questions of guilt, redemption, and divine judgment. Josiah lived until 1902, dying at age 78. His final words, recorded by William, were, "The land remembers what we forget. The water remembers what we bury." Rebecca Carver, the sole Carver to survive fully intact, was taken in by relatives in Virginia. She never returned to Bloodroot Hollow. Samuel Carver recovered from his leg wound but was left with a permanent limp. He disappeared from records in 1897. Some say he went west. Others claim he died in a logging accident. The truth, like so much about the Carvers, remains lost to time. The Carver cabin stood empty for 3 years before it burned under mysterious circumstances in 1895. Nobody bothered to rebuild. The land gradually reclaimed the site, weeds, then saplings, then mature trees, until nothing remained but a depression in the earth and a few foundation stones. But the phenomenon persisted. Over the decades, scientists have proposed numerous explanations for Bloodroot Creek's annual transformation. The most commonly cited theory involves dissolved iron compounds that, under specific temperature and pH conditions occurring only on October 13th, temporarily oxidize and create a red coloration. This explanation is logical, scientifically sound, and utterly fails to account for the sheer intensity of the color, the consistency with which it occurs on the exact same date, or the anomalous results from laboratory testing. Other theories range from the mundane to the outlandish: algae blooms, mineral seepage, underground springs that activate seasonally, even mass hallucination. Each theory has supporters and detractors. None has been proven definitively. The paranormal explanations are, naturally, more colorful. Some claim the water runs red with the blood of the Carvers, that their violent deaths imprinted on the land so deeply that the earth itself bleeds in sympathy every anniversary. Others suggest that Ezekiel Carver, in his final moments, cursed the hollow, that his rage and hatred were so potent they warped reality itself. A few mystics claim the phenomenon predates the Carver killings entirely, that October 13th has always been significant in that location for reasons lost to ancient memory, and the killings merely became associated with a much older mystery. Local folklore has incorporated the phenomenon into its fabric. Parents tell children stories about Bloodroot Creek as cautionary tales about the dangers of violence and the persistence of guilt. Ghost hunters conduct nighttime vigils in the hollow, hoping to capture evidence of paranormal activity. On October 13th each year, the narrow dirt road into Bloodroot Hollow becomes temporarily clogged with vehicles carrying curious visitors from across the country. The current residents, descendants of the McAllisters and other mountain families, have mixed feelings about the attention. Some have embraced it, opening small bed and breakfasts or offering guided tours. Others resent the intrusion, viewing the visitors as disrespectful gawkers exploiting tragedy for entertainment. What remains undisputed is this: every October 13th, Bloodroot Creek runs red. You can set your calendar by it. Researchers have maintained continuous observation for the past 30 years. The phenomenon has never failed to manifest. From sunset to sunrise on October 13th, the water turns crimson, runs its course through the hollow, and then returns to clarity with the dawn. In 2020, a team from a prestigious university installed permanent monitoring equipment in the creek. Sensors measuring pH, temperature, dissolved minerals, flow rate, and turbidity, all transmitting data in real time to remote servers. The data from October 13th that year showed nothing unusual. pH normal, mineral content normal, temperature appropriate for the season, yet observers on site documented the same red water they'd seen every previous year. Cameras captured it, dozens of witnesses saw it, but the sensors registered nothing anomalous. It's as if the phenomenon exists in a space science can't quite reach. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the lead researcher, stated in her published paper, "We can observe it, we can photograph it, we can even collect samples, though those samples rapidly revert to normal water with normal composition once removed from the creek. But we cannot measure it, cannot explain it, cannot fit it into our understanding of how the physical world operates." The story of Bloodroot Creek challenges our certainty about the nature of reality. It suggests that some phenomena exist at the intersection of history, memory, and the natural world in ways that resist conventional analysis. Whether you believe the water runs red because of geology, chemistry, mass psychology, or supernatural intervention, the fact remains: it does run red every year without fail. Perhaps the truth lies not in finding a single explanation, but in accepting that some events leave marks so deep that they transcend individual memory and become part of the landscape itself. The violence that occurred on October 13th, 1892, whatever its justifications or causes, was profound enough to alter something fundamental about that place. 6 men rode into a hollow seeking justice or vengeance, depending on perspective, and what they unleashed was something that persists across generations. The McAllister descendants still live in the region, though none remain in the original hollow. They carry the weight of their ancestors' actions with varying degrees of awareness and concern. Some embrace the story, viewing their forebears as heroes who stood against evil. Others carry guilt, believing that violence, however justified, always extracts a price that subsequent generations must pay. And every October 13th, they watch the creek run red, wondering what it means, what it demands, what price remains unpaid. The story of Bloodroot Creek remains a disturbing reminder that actions have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate moment. Violence, even in service of justice, leaves scars on the land, in the water, in the collective memory of a place. The McAllisters believed they were protecting their family, eliminating a genuine threat, delivering justice that the legal system had failed to provide. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps the Carvers were exactly the monsters the evidence suggested. But righteousness doesn't prevent trauma, and justified violence still spills blood that may never quite wash away. But questions remain, lingering like mist in a mountain hollow. Was the phenomenon always there, waiting for the right catalyst to make itself visible? Did the Carver killings create something new, or merely reveal something ancient? And what does it mean that the land itself seems to remember, seems to mark the anniversary with this impossible display? To this day, visitors to Bloodroot Hollow report strange experiences beyond the annual red water, unexplained sounds in the woods, shadows that move against the wind, a pervasive sense of sorrow that seems to emanate from the stones themselves. Some claim to see figures in period clothing standing on the ridges at dawn. Others report dreams, vivid, disturbing dreams of gunfire and screaming, of water turning red beneath their feet, of voices calling from the darkness in languages they don't understand. And on silent nights, when fog rolls down from the high peaks and settles in the valleys like a living thing, people still report hearing the echo of gunshots from the upper hollow, phantom sounds. From a morning 133 years past, violence preserved in some strange fold of time where October 13, 1892, is always happening, always unfolding, always demanding to be witnessed. If this journey through one of Appalachia's most enduring mysteries has resonated with you, if you find yourself pondering the ways violence echoes across generations and how the land itself might carry memory, then consider subscribing to the Untold Hour. There are many more stories waiting to be told, mysteries buried in time that deserve to be examined, phenomena that challenge our understanding of what's possible. Leave a like if this account provoked reflections that go beyond mere entertainment, and comment sharing your own perspectives on whether justice and vengeance can ever truly be separated, and whether the land remembers what we choose to forget. Until next time, remember that every place has stories written in its bones, and sometimes those stories bleed through.